Is
Force
that
Gold
Star
Show.
Trek? Oh,
Yeah. Actually, funny enough, with Picard, coming out soon, I started watching The Next Generation. Again, just like I'm gonna go to bed. I'll throw on Next Generation just
uh-huh.
for entertainment. Um, it's Force Cold. Here we are once again. Not a Star Trek show, I assure you. Although I have been accused of being a traitor online in the memes. I'm Travis, your host, joined by my courageous and knowledgeable co-host, Mr. Jip.
Hello, hello.
How
Welcome
do
to the
you, sir?
cult.
Welcome,
Um,
indeed.
I'm doing well. I'm doing really well. We actually send my son to his first day of school tomorrow, and so we're
What?
excited about that. Yeah, he's going to um,
Pre-K?
yeah, pre-K. He's 2. He turns 2 in a month, so
Yep.
that's exciting. And we got him Valentine's cards that he will be sharing at his little school, and we got him some Star Wars ones. So
Well done, sir.
Ray's on the envelope, and then inside there's a little puzzle, and it's BB-8. It's a little BB-8 puzzle. So yeah, it's a very good and bittersweet Star Warsy week here in my house.
Does it say something like, "These are your first steps into my heart"?
No, it says courage, honor, and something else.
What is that, Mulan's dad's sword or something?
I guess I don't know. There's some crossover there, but yeah, I was like, I don't remember seeing this before in Star Wars. But yeah, I don't know. They couldn't just say be mine. I guess, particularly since you know the shippers didn't get the relationship that they were hoping for out of
Yeah,
um, Finn, Poe, Ray, or Ben. So there's no romance in Star Wars. Sorry, we're not going there anymore.
romance is dead. It died with Ben Solo.
You bet it did.
Well, for a while, Star Wars' news is going to be pretty light for the most part. I do know that we have Project Luminous getting its like official, like we've just kind of had this name floating around, you know. So we actually, I think, in a couple weeks we'll be having like get some information
Yeah,
behind Project
which
Luminous here.
it sounds like the word on the street is that this is not announcing any movie, but it's giving us an idea of where like the
Things
literature
are
is
going to be
going to
headed.
be,
Yeah,
when it occurs, kind of like um, a next phase of storytelling, but it's not movies. So there were a lot of people who were
perfect.
really excited about possibly getting some sort of announcement on a new movie or movies, and I think that was pretty quickly quashed so that people didn't get their hopes up and ultimately disappoint themselves when the news wasn't what they had hoped for. So
Speaking of the word quash, in Resistance, what's the latest one? The latest Resistance book? Was it called Resistance? It wasn't Rising. That was Rebel Rising. Resistance Reborn. Boom. They used the word quash in that book, and I was like, "This is a Y." I'm proud because this is a YA novel. I don't think I knew the word quash till I was like 23.
oh, really? Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that they, want to push on people's vocabulary, particularly when most of what people are getting nowadays is like from tweets and
Yeah,
um,
considering that the like Oxford Dictionary has words that, yeah, we won't
it's
go
probably
there.
got
But
it's probably got yeet in it now, which I'm still
what
not
I know, what evs
100%
is in there
certain
somewhere.
what yeet is. I in general
I
know, but I'm not sure because the way people use it is very different than the definition I've been told by the youths. So
I think it's an insect on Dagobah, a yeet, if I'm not mistaken.
I'd believe you. I believe you.
So yeah, so we have Project Luminous. I mean, yeah, there's kind of been that mention of like time period stuff and kind of things. I feel like maybe it will soft launch kind of the next chapters of Star Wars you know, not necessarily the movies like you're saying, like titles or anything, but I think it might kind of give us an idea of where we're headed.
I agree. Yeah.
Since we're sort of finishing with the Skywalker saga. And yes, there's things that are still going to be kind of relegated to that era, but I think, you know, they're going to make a big move to kind of like, here's the new Disney era. Like, let's focus on, you know, something that we don't have to necessarily have connected to everything. So,
Yeah.
um,
And if, if
that's
I'm
kind of
going
my
to predict anything, and I also believe that there in the tweet or, the information I saw, they're saying that it's not going to be a video game that's being announced as well. I think that, now don't quote me on that, but I
mm-hmm.
think that's what I saw. And,
Yeah.
some other stuff I'd seen was speculating that we're getting, like a new KOTOR release or something like that. I I think that there is still a possibility that that type of connection might be made, because I'm of the opinion that they're going to go, um, like a thousand,
Old
like a thousand
Republic-ish.
years
Yeah.
back, um, and start building foundationally toward the OT basically and the prequels.
Yeah.
So I think that's where they're going to start, and I think that's a really safe place to go. And if you do that, then getting a video game that is a KOTOR-ish kind of game makes a heck of a lot of sense. So
Yeah. I mean, from the people who have kind of mentioned that they're part of it, it definitely sounds like books and some comics for sure, at least to begin with. So it is very exciting.
yeah.
And then today we got a excerpt and a cover for the sequel to Alphabet Squadron,
Oh, I
Shadowfall.
thought it was going to be
I haven't
Balphabet Squadron.
Squadron, the Alphabet Squadron, Part B, just simply Part B. Um, so, for those who have not read the first book, Shadowfall refers to the it's a Imperial squadron. If yeah, that's correct, is it not?
Yeah, it's a TIE Squadron.
Um,
Yeah,
a TIE squadron that are basically like the ultimate TIE
like the
pilots,
like
kind of.
if there was like a military version of the Blue Angels, like I don't know exactly what that is.
Yeah.
Like that's what the TIEs are. They're like the Navy SEALs of the Space Force.
Yeah,
Whatever our version of that is here in America, I don't know.
and we see them in the first book a little bit and have some moments with them, but I'm hoping, you know, you and I were talking today about kind of what our thoughts on the first book were, and kind of going in the second one of like having bigger events going on. I also hope that kind of in the way that like Lost Stars or even the Inferno Squadron book did, like I hope we get some time with the Shadowfall characters to kind of, you know, humanize them a little bit, so that like it's great knowing our Alphabet Squadron characters and, you know, feeling for them and seeing their side of the story, but I also would like to see a little bit of the Imperial side too.
Yeah, which I think there's a possibility that that occurs, just basically because of the way that it was kind of hinted at maybe a little bit in the first book.
Yeah,
We get to see a little bit of like conversation between, um,
that's actually one of my favorite scenes in
yeah,
the book.
like they're
Is yeah,
trying to, it's kind of like a World War I kind of occurrence where it's Christmas and the Germans and I think it was the British kind of meet in the middle of no man's
this
land
weird
and have
armistice.
like this
Yeah,
1 day armistice on Christmas. And there's kind of um, a scene like that in the first Alphabet Squadron book where the characters are, in their fighters in space, and there's like a lull in the fighting, and they can hear one another over the radio, and they're kind of chatting. And one of the rebel pilot, or not, I guess he's not a rebel, but a New Republic pilot, um, is I guess would be what it is, and he's trying to talk to them and just treat them like humans. And the Imperial response is kind of like, we're
It
gonna
gets so
like
grim so
we're gonna come
fast.
kill you. I'm coming
Yeah.
to murder you and everybody you care about. And it,
Yeah.
is kind of like
It's
this,
dark, man.
vision into the difference between the way the Imperials function and are trained and the way that the rebels had been trained, because the rebels were still, viewing people as people, and even, some of the people present on the side of the rebellion or the New Republic are former Imperials, and so there's this like sense that um, they could come back and that they could be redeemed, and they are
Yeah.
just people still, right? They are just whatever species, but they're still somebody to be cared about, known, and loved potentially, and the Imperials just like I don't care, I will murder you, because
Yeah.
at that point in time they're like the last remnants of the empire, and they're going to be the most you know stuck in their ways,
Probably the most
most ruthless,
ruthless
or the
too.
most like religious, in their beliefs. And so yeah, I loved that, and I think that we might get more of that view into what it looks like from the Imperials that are left over that really believed in, maybe not exactly what the Empire was all about with respect to Palpatine's like inner monologue, and what his like ultimate intent was, but like the desire to bring this like order and peace to the galaxy, even if for a little while it had to come through, uh, this iron fist, I guess. So I would like to see
Yeah.
more of a vision into what's going on in these TIE pilots' heads.
Yeah, these books post Jedi are so interesting because, like, you are getting these perspective of like Imperials who basically are like, like one of the lead characters in the Alphabet Squadron is like, yeah, this game's lost for us. Like, kind of just surrenders, and then there are the others who are just like, I know nothing else. The Empire, is my life, and I'm
Yeah,
gonna
like
fight
I'd
tooth
rather
and
be
nail.
dead
And it's like,
than
yeah,
yeah.
very extreme ends at this point.
Something
So
that makes me think of, I forget, I wish I had thought of this before we started recording. I can't remember the book right now. I think it's one of the YA Jedi Academy books. Um, there is a planet, I think it's Luke. It could be some of his students that they're on, and it might
the Luke
yeah.
system.
And gosh, I so badly wish I could remember what this is. But it's a TIE pilot who has crash landed. It might even be on Yavin 4.
Hmm.
Um, Dang, what is it? And it's like these Japanese pilots who got stranded on some of these Pacific islands, and then like they lived there for 50 years and thought the war was still going on. And somebody comes across them, 50 years later, it's in the 70s or the 80s or something, and they think that it's still happening, and they're ready to fight for the empire, the Japanese empire, and they've got no clue that there's peace. And it's the same thing with this TIE pilot. Um, and I would be curious to see them bring something like that into Alphabet Squadron, since it's something that no longer exists within canon. I thought that was a really
Yeah.
cool storyline when I read it as a kid. So I'd like to see something like that potentially brought back in here as well.
It would be nice. So speaking of canon, the Clone Wars is coming back February
Guess who's
21st.
back?
And
Back again.
that's the second time I heard that song today, weirdly enough. But not the actual song, just referenced to. Um, Clone Wars is back, and season 7, final season. But Clone Wars is that weird, like, canon bridging gap for us, in that, you know, it was like when Disney took over, it was like, okay, movies are canon, oh, and also Clone Wars. And it was kind of like that only little thing was left over that we got. Um, and I think it was very important that it became canon because there was so much
Oh
built
yeah,
there
yeah, tons.
in those. And I mean, there's been so many books and stuff that have done a lot of character building, but you look at like a 6 season series, like that's a ton to work off of. And um, it introduced a lot of new characters. It also reintroduced some characters too that were um, brought up in expanded universe, and then like got pulled into this when George was still part of things. And luckily some of these characters have survived basically because of Clone Wars. So we figured this week, kind of, since there's not much else to talk about, I mean, we could dive into Rise of Skywalker endlessly again, and we still probably will for the future. But kind of leading up to that, we wanted to kind of discuss the series as a whole. So this week, we're going to kind of touch on the first three of the previous 6 seasons.
Which is like a pretty big
Um,
task.
yeah, it really is. And not only that, but also the Clone Wars movie, which came out in 2008. And you and I were both living in Waco at the time when
Yes, we
that came
were.
out. And I remember going to see it, um, I think opening day when it came out, or at least opening weekend. And I was like one of like four people in the theater that
Well,
week
you know what's
itself.
crazy is I didn't even know it had come out.
Really?
I was so like
It was a
I'm not going to give my
it
whole
was
life
a
story,
weird time.
but I was like so wrapped up in other things at that point. Like I was only in the books at that point with Star Wars.
Yeah.
I was not paying attention to anything else. And I was living somewhere where I did not have um any TV. So I only had the internet, and the internet was still not like what it is today. Like it's hard to remember like 10 years ago. Like the internet was something that like I went to like espn.com and had email, and that was it. Like
Yeah.
I was not a message board person at this point in time. Yeah, I was that's just not something that I had like come across yet really, which is kind of crazy because it feels like I should have in 2009. Um, but like it was just not something that I had really accessed. And so I like wasn't even aware that it was out. And I remember hearing about
Mm.
it like 4 or 5 weeks after it was already out. And I can't remember if it was already out of theaters in Waco, but it was like a pretty quick in and out, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
well,
And it was
and
already gone by
considering
the time I heard about it, which
considering
was
our
really disappointing.
our theaters in 2008 in Waco was very measly. Like there was
It
two
was
theaters basically,
not
and
great. Yeah.
not great. No, three theaters. One of them was the dollar theater. The other one was way across town, and then the other one, yeah, like you got the big movies, but everything there were so few screens, everything's cycling through so fast. So yeah, that was part of why I hopped on it quick, and I went by myself, and um, yeah, I remember watching it and kind of being like, well, that was fun, I guess, and kind of having this little interim story. And I remember initially kind of being like feeling like it was really goofy, mostly because like the interchange of the snips and Sky Guy thing. Like I was like,
Yeah.
all right, and at age 2021, you're like, that's probably almost the least cool Star Wars could be in some ways for you
Oh
at
yeah,
that
for
time
sure.
in your life when you're in college.
Not at all what I was looking for out of Star
Hmm.
Wars at the time. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I remember just like when I eventually did hear about it, and I was like, oh, I should go see that. And it was like, I could have, gone, I think maybe to the Dollar Theater and seen it. And I was like, I'm not going to go to the Dollar Theater in Waco to see a movie. Like, that's the last thing I want to do. And I was probably, way more concerned with, school and, working at Common Grounds with you and, you know, trying to date cute girls or something like that. It was like, I didn't really understand what was going on at that point in time with it and like what it was laying the ground for. In retrospect, I like totally wish I'd gotten to see it in theaters. and
Yeah.
like had that experience on the big screen, because it was probably 2 or 3 years before I ever actually even got to see it.
Hmm.
And I think I was, married before. Yeah, definitely married before I even got to see it at that point.
How funny. Yeah, that was yeah, I didn't even think much of it too after I saw it, and probably didn't see it again till about the time the series came on. And
Yeah, I
I
think I
was even
red boxed it.
and I was even still kind of like, okay, we're going back to that animation style. My one of my like big things for the show was I loved Tartakovsky's Clone Wars. Like, still to this day, I think one of the coolest like Star Wars mediums possible is Star Wars anime is like the coolest thing. And um, even some of the characters that are introduced there, showed up in in here later, and we'll talk about that. And um, yeah, it kind of was odd, and CG. It's not that CG was like in its infancy, because I mean, we had Toy Story as early as '94, but like the proliferation of the CG like animation medium was it was like kind of hitting its stride at this time.
It was definitely
And
still developing. It was not
yeah,
what it is today by any means.
and the movie got a decent budget, but then even jumping into the first season, like I've watched a bunch of featurettes and stuff, and they talk about like, they had to use and reuse assets in the show, because they had basically had a really tiny budget for this series, because at the time to produce a series like this was very expensive. And no, Siri, I don't need you to tell me anything.
Hey, Siri, turn off Travis's electricity.
No.
I just accidentally turned mine
Yeah.
on.
um, that yeah, it was like it was still rough, and we've talked about this in the show many times, that like how this show evolved and matured, not just in tone but in style, and its cinema style. um, you can look at the first episode to the last, and even the recent trailers, like it's so much cleaner than it was before, and the
Yeah.
amount of detail that goes into things. I mean, it's kind of like, in animation, you relegate characters to like a single costume for representation purposes. Like,
Yeah.
it helps younger audiences identify who a character is, because they're always wearing the same thing and stuff. But it's like, they wouldn't change the littlest of things in characters because it would just cost too much. Or a set piece would be repurposed, they would just like change the color of it or something like that. So um but I didn't really get into the show, I think, till the end of the first season. And um I torrented like the entire first season, I think, and watched them all in maybe an afternoon or two, and was kind of like, I'm really into this. And that's where it kind of like, I think my love for the show came in. It was just like getting to binge the beginning of this series for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I think I probably, gosh, man, whenever it showed up on Netflix for the first time
Mm-hmm.
is probably when I started watching it all the way through, because I didn't have cable for forever. And I uh I stopped torrenting stuff like maybe like freshman or sophomore year of college. I got like really like morally convicted over it. Um, just
I
like felt
had
like it was just like
I
not
had no
right.
care in the world.
And so I was like, all right, like I can't do this. Like this is problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I just have this like general sense that everybody on the internet is bad, and so they were probably going to give me like some sort of like terrible computer virus. And I was like, I cannot afford this. And I would be so ashamed if I can like destroyed my computer by like torrenting something.
Yeah.
And I'm a worrier, and so I probably thought like the DA was going to show up at my front door one day and be like, "You wouldn't steal a car, would you?" And you wouldn't download a car. Uh, and so I probably waited until it was on Netflix, I think, before I started really watching it. And as soon as
Yeah.
it was there, I binged it all like so ridiculously quickly. I remember my wife coming home multiple times from work in our first like couple of years of marriage and be like, "Oh my goodness, like you're watching this again." I'm like, I just can't get enough of it. Um, and particularly when you get to like watch it all the way through quickly and you get like you just said, you get to advance um, like through the quality really quickly, and you
Yeah.
see like
Yeah.
the depth of story um, becomes something that's a little bit more mature in some ways, and then also maybe a little bit better written, and then you see the production quality increase. And yeah, I was pretty quickly hooked, I think, if I remember correctly. So yeah, I really enjoyed it an awful lot, which is
So
different than my Rebels
yeah,
experience. So
yeah, yeah. So going into the first season, I figure we talk about some of the episodes in this, and um, we're gonna go about. I mean, we're gonna jump all around with the show, because the show itself jumps all around. So
yes, it
um,
does.
a lot of I for the most part now watch it. I do the like Chrono Wars viewing of it. For those of you who don't
Yeah.
know, that's basically the chronological viewing. And if you didn't realize that the episodes are out of chronological order, well, that's
Oh my
okay.
gosh.
We'll talk about that.
Which,
We'll talk about that. You should
interestingly,
realize something is off.
yeah, I've never actually watched it in the chronological order. I've always
Mm,
just watched through seasons or gone back and just
yeah,
watched individual episodes that I wanted
yeah.
to see again.
Do some arcs and stuff like that for sure, for sure. Um, yeah, that was kind of one of the weird things because I remember, um, I think I was even behind when it gets to season 3, where some of that becomes a little more important of the chronology of things. That like I was behind a few episodes, and so I started watching, and that's like when the Battle of Christophs, can't even say that freaking word, Christophsis is occurring, which is part of what's going on during the Clone Wars movie. And I was like, wait, did I miss something? Like, what's going on here? And I got like, yeah, really confused about that for quite a while. Um, but so going into season 1, one of the arcs I wanted to talk a little bit about was the Malevolence arc, um, which introduces us to a couple of cool characters and a ship that we will see appear later in some literature that I believe you will recall, Jip, in the Tarkin book, um, the Carrion Spike
Yes, we
shows
do.
back up in
Yeah,
that
it
book,
does.
which is the I think this one's a prototype that we see in the Malevolence arc. It's just a prototype of that ship.
Yeah, I believe so. I think that's the
It's
case.
not the same one, but it is, yeah, a prototype of it, and that shows up there, which is a cool little kind of just nod to all that jazz. Then we also get what is his name? Um, he's coming back.
Tell me
He's
something about him so I can help you with this name.
the spider guy.
The spider guy.
Is
Um,
that? Am I thinking of the wrong arc? Am I on the wrong one? I might be on the wrong arc. No,
well,
no, no, no,
when you
no.
say the spider guy, you
This
mean
this the spider general for the
I mean,
Separatists.
Grievous.
No, 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 no. He's a proper Spider-Man. Not
Oh,
Spider-Man.
um, that's I think that's season 2. Is that season 2?
Oh, am I skipping ahead? I could be. You could be right. I'll have to edit myself there.
Is that Admiral Trench?
Trench.
Yeah,
Where the crap does Trench show
that's
up, man?
I know. Yeah, I think that's season 2, episode 16.
Well, shoot. Well, then I have totally just
We did
destroyed
say
that
we were
entire
going to
thing.
talk about all 3 seasons,
This is true.
all 3 of the
Well,
first season.
wait. So
So I will fault
it,
you 0%.
okay. Well, see, we talked about this today when we were talking about the show before we recorded the show. So I was like, I have watched this show so much and so many times out of order that I can't remember the proper order.
Oh my
And like,
gosh.
I will get arcs and seasons mixed up. Like I have no connection to when some of the
Yeah.
things took
Well, I
place.
had to look up like 5 times when the Mon Calamari like battle was
Oh
taking place
yeah,
with the shark head people, because I
yeah,
thought for sure that that was like first season, and I kept on having to go back and reconvince myself that it was what, in like the 4th season. Which,
yeah.
see,
It's
obviously I
much
can't even
later on.
remember now. So yeah, I was like, you got to be kidding me! I would have sworn that was at the very beginning, but yeah,
Okay, well then that would mean that the carrion spike is not in the first season then.
yeah, the Carrion
Because
Spike is not in the first season. I don't believe at all.
yeah. Okay. Well then scratch that. Sorry everybody.
Well, in the
We do
first
get
season, we still get the like there is a ship that is very important. It's not like
yeah.
there's
The malevolence is important.
yeah, it's not like
So I'm
there's
not
not,
wrong there.
yeah, you're not totally off.
Correct, correct, correct. Um and then we get like Rookies is another one of my favorite episodes in the first season. Because that's one of our first like um
Rex and
very
Cody.
Rex and Cody. It's a very clone centered episode. I love a lot of the character building of like the Jedi and stuff, but for whatever reason, I mean, it's the Clone Wars, and so I love the character building we get out of some of these
Yeah.
clones and some of the other side characters and stuff like that.
Well, I like what,
And
even like the fact that we get all these different personalities and like senses of individualism from all the
dude,
clones, and I think that
D.
there's
Bradley
something.
Baker,
Oh
he
my
did an
gosh.
amazing job with that. Yeah,
Yeah, like I think that that is something that like tells you a lot about what the force is and
mm-hmm.
what the philosophy of individualism is, and like what a soul is, um, within the Star Wars galaxy, within that
Yeah,
universe of storytelling. These people are all from the exact same genetic code, but they're more than, a math equation. They're more than, just some biological code on a genome. They are, these living, breathing beings that are communicating individually with the Force, and the Force recognizes them as autonomous individuals. And
yeah,
I think that that's like a really awesome way to interpret how the Force would interact with, all of these clone troopers. And it's something that we don't get from, from the movies really at all. And we see, faceless wonders for the most part, that are just kind of like, expendable. They're the to go back to Star Trek, they're the red shirted ensign from, every single episode, where they're just, it's like, well, the guy wearing the red shirt's going to die. Um,
yeah, yeah.
so the fact that, in Clone Wars and the TV show, we get, you know these like
And
really
tune
beautiful, like rich tapestries of who these people are and what their hopes and dreams and desires are. Um, I thought that was a really neat direction to take, because I think if you kind of like dig into that, it does tell you a lot more about the Force and its connection to individuals that are even not Force sensitive. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's very telling.
And even and to an extent, some of that kind of Star Trek ensign stuff does happen in this show because I mean, there's countless numbers of clones who die
Oh
throughout the
my goodness,
series.
yeah,
But yeah, this episode is so important because it introduces um, about 4 or 5 that we'll basically see throughout nearly the entire show. Um, we get Rex, Cody, who have kind of already been introduced here, but Heavy, Echo, and Fives are 3 that we see almost the entirety of the show.
yeah.
Um,
Which
Echo and Fives,
I
who
do have a little
later
bit of a
get
hard
some of
time
the.
with them calling heavy heavy. It feels like they're criticizing me. So
Hey, well, funny enough, I think the spelling is actually just
I
Hevy.
think you're right.
It's shorthanded even further, but
Stop fat
but
shaming me. Just have a dad
Echo and
bod.
you just you can read it into it another way because he carries a big gun. So I'll let you think on that the way you want
His
to,
gun
the
is
way you want.
heavy,
He got a big gun. Um,
heavy
that
ordnance.
Echo and Fives play crucial roles throughout the entire series, leading up to the end of the 6th season, and we'll get into that in the next episode. Um, but yeah, this is such great groundwork for I think I don't even know how much foresight Filoni and George had at the time of like how far they wanted this show to go for, because obviously they're like it's a Clone Wars, so it's going to last for a little while, but like how long are we did they initially really think that was going to be um
I'd love to know. I'd really
right,
love to
yeah,
know.
yeah.
I think the fact that it's not in chronological order tells you something about that.
Well, and the chronology doesn't even really become an issue till like season 2, really into season 3 too, where that starts to change things. Um, and in this season, we get Asajj Ventress, who has become like a staple female Star Wars character. She originally actually got introduced in the Star Wars Republic comic um, in, I think it was like '02, '03, after Attack of the Clones came out, and there was a series of, I think it's Dark Horse comics. That this was one of my favorite, like what really got me into Star Wars comics was the Republic series because it was basically the Clone Wars. Um, and Dirge was another character who got introduced here, who sadly did not get canonized. He makes an appearance in the Tartakovsky Clone Wars as well. I would love to see Dirge in some capacity get canonized in the future. It would be like a dream for me. Great character, but Asajj shows up in that comic, and she originally came from a um, concept art piece from Attack of the Clones. I think before Dooku was settled on, there was some like Sith female assassin ideas being thrown up for Dooku's character, and so that's where she
Some
actually
shades of
originated.
Mara Jade.
Yeah, yeah. And so one of those concepts became Asajj Ventress, and she, yeah, shows up in the show, and she's almost a little over the top, um, like in the movie and to begin with, and she grew. I think she really grew on me as a character. Like she starts off as this just like I can prove to anybody how deadly I am, and like she gets really humanized over time as we get to learn more of her story too.
Yeah,
So
yeah. The fact that she is, she's not a monotone character, that only serves as like a foil to the good guys, I think is
yeah.
I mean that's bigger than than most, kids cartoons are going to be, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that is different. That's unique. And that's something that they did such a great job of, that, providing complexity to these characters that weren't always present. It's not just Ahsoka and Anakin and Obi-Wan that we see growth out of. It's, you know, significant
Yeah.
that we're getting it out of Ventress.
Yeah, and I think it's so important with especially a series that runs for so long is like, you know, stuff like, I don't know why Powerpuff Girls is popping into my head for some reason, but
Mojo
um
Jojo.
yeah, for whatever reason Mojo Jojo like came to mind and stuff. But like thinking about, in a single episode of a show like that, you can like tell a story or teach an arc with a character, and sort of by like at the beginning the character is one way, by the end basically the character is going to kind of returned back to that, both the good guy and the bad guy.
Yeah.
Whereas with this show, like, because we know where the characters kind of, especially like, Anakin and Obi-Wan, like we have a sort of a point A and a point B of episode 2 and 3 that we have to like achieve, that we know there's going to be growth throughout that. Like ultimately, yeah, they're kind of the same characters, but there still has to be that progress. And doing that with the villains too was, I think, very powerful throughout this show. Asajj being one of those examples for sure. Um,
Yeah, I think that's a
Sorry.
really interesting point to make. I think about like the old, Hanna-Barbera
Mm-hmm.
cartoons and things like that we grew up on. And there wasn't, growth with, anybody we saw in those kinds of TV shows. It really is unique to get something that's designed for, older, you know, kids, I guess. Like, I don't know what that would be, it's like TVY, like, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like whatever.
TV 13
Yeah.
kind of. Yeah.
Um, I feel like that is a unique thing that we're getting out of the Clone Wars that wasn't something that I grew up with. This actual sense of growth, not only of the good guy potentially, where they um, are growing older and wiser and becoming more competent, but out of whoever the bad guy is or the anti-hero probably is the more accurate way to describe somebody like Ventress or Maul, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
so I think that's really unique about what they did.
So going from one female villain to a female heroine, I think probably, we would be remiss if we didn't at length discuss the kind of greatest female character to come out of this show, and that's Ahsoka Tano. Um,
I don't think anybody's going to disagree with you about that.
they won't. They won't. Who, like I said, in the first, when I first saw the movie in the theater, I kind of wrote Ahsoka off. Like, I was like,
Wait, is that supposed
meh.
to be like a crappy Twi'lek? What is this?
Yeah. Togrutans were barely explored with like Shakti, and um, I was just like, because of the dynamic between her and Anakin is so campy that I was just like, okay, whatever. Not to mention that, for a lot of people, there was this massive disbelief of like, Anakin had a Padawan during the Clone Wars, and then she's not there in Episode 3. Like, I think that was the biggest issue
Yeah, it's
people
like,
took
what
with,
the heck? Like,
the show.
yeah, there's no way that you would have a Padawan and then it just like doesn't like
Yeah.
show up like that. I mean, that seemingly would be very problematic
Hmm.
until you
Yeah.
get the end of the story.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, we'll get to that next episode. Um, but yeah, she, I think, and I feel so happy to kind of been disproven by, my initial reactions to this character, that she went, that I think still, Ashley puts such a great performance into this character, and there's still something about Ahsoka's voice that is still like, it is cartoonish, it's bright, um, that still to me it very much sits in a cartoon character. I think her Rebels portrayal has a little more gravitas to it, mostly because the character is older.
Oh yeah,
Um,
totally. Yeah, I
but
agree.
still, like, I remember probably within most of the first season, kind of being like, Ahsoka, whatever, like kind of wanting to see more of what's going on with Anakin and Obi-Wan, of course. Um, but how much I became invested in Ahsoka's character throughout the series,
Yeah,
and her connection to her master, of um, what that turns into.
I
Um,
think it makes Anakin's his fall even more tragic when you
oh yeah,
see, you know, his interactions with Ahsoka, the context of his temporary failure um, is already so tragic, and then to
hmm,
see the way that he lets Ahsoka down, not only, you know, he lets his own master down, not only he lets his kids down, his wife, the Jedi Council. I mean, like the whole Jedi Order, all of the New Republic. I mean, like how far do we have to go? You know, the number of people he let down. Like to see this
yeah,
person who has invested their life in learning from him, like by
yeah,
choice. Um, you know, they shared all of this experience together, um, and he fails and he falls, and you
yeah,
know that becomes even more of a gut punch in the context of his relationship with Ahsoka than it already was, I think.
yeah. It's like for Obi-Wan, it's one thing to, like, I tried to do the best, tried to teach him the lessons that I could, and maybe I didn't try hard enough, or maybe he was just kind of bad from the get-go. But with Ahsoka, it's kind of this, like, you know maybe everything I was taught was a lie. Like,
Yeah,
it's what she feels like maybe she has to throw away because of seeing, yeah, somebody, her mentor, fall like that. I think, yeah, it's crushing.
and like
um
watching Anakin's internal struggle in the context of teaching somebody else to do something that he doesn't necessarily have full faith in is
yeah,
like that's significantly complex. That, I mean, that is
for
not
sure.
a basic, you know, 1 + 1 = 2 kind of storyline.
Hmm.
um, you know, you're asking a lot from your voice actor, you're asking a lot from your writers to be able
Asking a lot of your
to.
audience
Oh
too,
yeah,
to interpret that. It just Anakin as a character right there, over a series, and Ahsoka's, tutelage underneath him, like that. Yeah, that's a lot to put on everybody for
yeah,
that amount of time.
yeah, seeing him try to discipline her and, you know, provide encouragement to her when she's rash and makes mistakes and is out of control. um, and you know he's trying to correct her, and it's like, dude, that's you. She is
Yeah,
emulating what she has seen.
yeah.
It's, you know,
It's
it's
that. It's
frustrating, and you know that he's heard it, and you know that he believes it, at least, like, you know, and like marginally believes it. um but it's definitely an added complexity to who he is that makes it even tougher to watch his fall, because it's like, well, he knows, he freaking
hmm.
knows, and he has taken it to heart enough to the point where he can um teach Ahsoka. And I don't want to go too far here because I want to leave more for next week. But he's taught her enough to grow in the Force
Yeah,
and in the Jedi
yeah,
Order, and do it in a way that, like, she's legitimately learning.
yeah.
Um, and it's not just, you know, it's stuff that it's you know, at face value. So I'm
I
struggling to
think
not
what's
go further into this analysis right now.
Yeah, no, no,
So.
no. I think what's really interesting and complex and successful on Ahsoka's side is that, um, Anakin, I think, as we see through this show, um, even in the movie, in the first episodes, is he tries to give her a great deal of, do as I say, not as I do kind of stuff. And I think even to the point of, is Lux Bonteri? He shows up in the first 3 seasons, if I'm not
Ooh.
mistaken. Could be wrong, but um, that even when it comes to like romance, Anakin's trying to be, a little smarter with teaching his Padawan than he himself is actively, like disobeying the Jedi teachings by. So, um, she, I think, she's like she sits in the crosshairs of a lot of very interesting character development, that she herself grows through. I mean, we see a lot of Anakin's what Anakin's going through, how that affects her, what Obi-Wan's going through, how that affects her, other um, other characters, even the villains, how they're affecting her growth and stuff. The way she perceives, the dark side and stuff like that. It's very, it's it like I can't give this show enough credit for what it did for a young audience. Like, it really is an incredibly complex show for such a young
Yeah.
audience.
And I just looked it up, and Lux shows up in season 3.
Okay, cool. Okay, yeah. I was like, pretty sure Lux shows up early enough that when you see him again later, it's like not totally crazy. We could spend a while on Ahsoka. We will spend a lot more time on her next season or next episode, and going forward too. A couple other characters I want to touch on is two other characters that we get introduced to in the first 3 seasons. Cham Syndulla, who becomes very important, not necessarily Cham specifically, but his heritage in Hera and everything.
His
How
heritage.
ha ha ha!
You can use that.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Cham's heritage. The kind of importance that character plays, and again, speaking of complexity of this show, you look at the Ryloth arc. How people kind of get all pissy about episode 1 and like the nuances of trade disputes and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, do you not realize that the Clone Wars series is almost entirely that kind of
It's
stuff?
just political maneuverings. Is like
Yeah,
because that's
it's
because that's the genius of Palpatine.
yeah, and it's like how the Jedi and stuff, how everybody's going. Yes, there's some episodes that are just like battle episodes and stuff like that, but
And then there are some
underlying most
episodes
of
that
the
are just
arcs,
droids walking through a desert with
or
a tiny
or
little General Midget stuck inside one of
or
them.
Jar Jar trying to pretend that he's a Jedi, or Jar Jar trying to distract people with gimmicks. Like, the show is all over the place, but at the end of the day, it still is dealing with tons of complex issues in, what is the war isn't just this war of like, I want this, no, I want this, okay, let's fight over it. Like, it is infinitely more complex than that. And every episode, to some extent, reveals, how much more complex this war is for somebody, how different, the perspective is for each and every planet in this galaxy is dealing with this battle, from the people who want nothing to do with what's going on, to um, people who are, trying to end it for, various other reasons. It's such a different, cool show, and down to like, how like Ryloth is perceived, how you have people who are trying to get their own offensive going and don't necessarily want help, but it's I think it's just so neat. And even how, gosh, I can't remember what book it is.
Welcome to
that
Force
like
Cult, where we
Cham.
can't remember the names of any of the books that we've ever read. It's the second time this episode.
That's dude. It's well, the thing is like when I'm not consuming new Star Wars content, I'm no, I take that back. While I'm consuming new Star Wars content, I'm constantly revisiting old Star Wars
Yeah,
content.
yeah,
So it's like I need a freaking like wall of things that I can just like red string stuff to try to keep track of things. But you know how Cham is even referred to years later as like, how he's perceived as like an insurrectionist or stuff
yeah,
like this, how throughout the galaxy the struggles of different planets and peoples are perceived differently. And I think God, this show did that so beautifully. I'm in awe of it. Well done. Um, Coming off of Cham, the next person I want to talk about was, I think, a series favorite is another villain, and that's Cad Bane.
Cad Bane.
Is he's kind of this like Sergio Leone character that I think everybody wanted. This villain, this long coat, big brimmed hat, double pistol toting villain that he's like you can't hate the guy because he's just too cool. At the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean he is directly taken out of the Man with No Name series. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I mean I can't even remember the name of um, the character at this point in time, but he's the one who wears the flat brim hat, and he's
Mm-hmm.
working with um, Clint Eastwood in a couple of the movies, and played by is it Lee Van Cleef? Is that who it is?
I
Um,
think you're correct. I'll look that up real quick and check for you.
and I mean that like even like his look is totally drawing on that character. I don't know if it's Lucas or who decided to really heavily draw on that in particular, but I mean just absolutely nails it to a point where I'm like, as I'm watching Cad Bane, I am kind of like relying on what I already know about this bounty hunter from for a few dollars more or a fistful of dollars or whatever else. It's just so cool to get something that's like that visually, and even like the way he talks, I guess probably if I like really stretch a little bit, is similar enough to where it feels that way. You can just like draw on that as you watch it.
You are correct. Lee Van Cleef
Perfect.
is indeed the character you were thinking of. Yeah. Yeah, he I think yeah, the voice is this like such an iconic feature of the character.
I want to know if
And
I want to know what kind of like filters they put it through, because
mm-hmm.
it sounds
Yeah.
so mechanical.
And that's weirdly something that's like almost basically never discussed on the show is why Cad Bane has the apparatus that he has, um, that modulates his voice and what apparently, sounds like is helping keep him alive. And if he's not a direct reference to DC's Bane, I would be astounded
Yeah, for
if,
real.
if
That's
there's
true.
no connection there. Um,
The
but
Batman.
yeah, the Jedi are evil. He's such a cool dude that even when he's like just supremely evil and a jerk, you're just like, man, but his coat's so cool. Actually, I think one of the times that I was just like, man, this dude's messed up is in a wolf. That'll be a next episode one, but he does some pretty twisted stuff.
He's like
But he
he's
really is.
maybe outside of like Palpatine, um, and maybe Grievous, like legitimately the
Yeah,
most distinctly monotone in his evil. Like, he is a bad guy
Yeah.
through and through.
Yeah.
He is like
Oh yeah.
he is not somebody that you look at like
There's
Ventress or even Maul, who you're like,
You're not
there's
trying to turn
yeah,
him
like
in
there's
any way.
something
Yeah,
within them that they're
he's bad.
desperate for, like a like an opportunity, some power, some growth, like, like whoever it is, like there's something going on within them. There's some sort of like turmoil, and Bane is, Cad Bane is 100% just a bad guy who does bad guy things.
Yeah.
Hood rat stuff with my friends.
Hood rat stuff indeed. Um, so a couple more characters that I want to touch on with what time we have. I think this is probably going to be a 3-part episode, mostly because there's one arc in particular we're probably going to talk an entire episode about.
I
And
can't
you already
imagine
know
what you're
which that.
talking about.
Yeah,
I think,
my
well, I think we're going to have to incorporate an extra episode into that as well.
yeah. The Mortis arc in season 3 is a very, very important
Yeah. And we'll have to include
arc.
we'll
Not
have to include Yoda's ayahuasca trip into that as well.
yeah, right. Very important arc in season 3, not just for the show, but for Star Wars as a whole. Kind of going forward from there is very, very important. But a couple other characters that we get in the first season, first 3 seasons, sorry, is Savage Opress, which Clancy Brown, we've talked about him many times before. He recently showed up in The Mandalorian. Dude's just got such a memorable voice. Savage, who, another sort of tortured character that we get to see his sort of rise and fall of throughout the show. Zabraks, I think, were some of the coolest things. Playing Jedi Fallen Order, you get to spend a ton of time on Dathomir, which is really great. So if you enjoy any of those aspects of the Clone Wars, you get to spend a ton of time there in the game. But he plays a critical role throughout the entire show for kind of both sides of things.
He's totally a
He's
pawn. I feel bad for him the entire
he
time.
he You really do, because from the get-go he is forced into something that he doesn't want to do, and it's by means of trying to save his family, like he's he it's sort of this like Hunger Games situation, to start with, like, I'll kind of make the sacrifice so that
I
my
volunteer as
brother,
tribute.
basically, yeah, and finds himself being, yeah, the pawn between two evils warring against each other. It's just like, it's so ridiculous. And his, through their quest for power, what makes his quest for power, like, so weird, and basically his like day training into the dark side, but and such a brute that he is. The Night Sisters also are some of the greatest like introductions in this show.
I love that they
Um,
exist. Because of their presence in the book, The Courtship of Princess Leia. They've always been close to my heart.
mhm. Yeah, there. It's they play a big part in Jedi Fallen Order too. I think, you know the Force, um, to perceive the Force as like everybody's kind of in the same on the same page. It's like the world we live in. Like, I think a lot of religions basically kind of have the same feeling about things, but they just tell it as a different story. And I think in the Star Wars galaxy, like the Force, this has come up in books and stuff. that the practice of the Force and the perception of the Force is a little different. Some kind of see it as more as magic. Some see it as kind of a general life force to the world, or some people have different names for it.
This is the
So I
way.
think this is the Night Sisters are like a very apt kind of thing to have in the Star Wars galaxy of like basic witches basically. So um, the last character I want to touch on before we leave you this week is a very crucial character. One of my favorite characters in this show, more for how they affect another character, um, is the Duchess Satine, which I realize, you know, Filoni does an incredible job with female characters. Like the dude brings in some really well written female characters in his shows. So hats off to you, sir. I know you won't take your own hat off, but hats off, Dave.
What is under the hat?
Um, what is under the hat? Um, so Duchess Satine, the brief tryst, um, love connection with Obi-Wan Kenobi,
What's love
um,
got to do? Got to do with
and
it.
the Duchess of Mandalore. Which, man, okay, so the fact that we're coming up on season 2 of The Mandalorian and Kenobi really puts some hope in me that we'll touch base on like the Mandalorian culture a little bit more, and maybe somehow the Duchess and her sister and stuff like that. That's just fingers crossed for me here.
Yeah, I'll be very interested to see what's going on there. That's for sure. Yeah, I mean, Satine as like an individual character, I really enjoy. Um, she provides complexity to the Mandalorians. They're not just like this, kind of like
They're not all Death Watch.
yeah, like it's not this like single note, um, kind of like Spartan existence. There's more to that. There is more humanity to them.
Yeah.
And the relationship between Satine and Obi-Wan, is obviously something that a lot of people have really, picked up on, and a lot of people were hoping that Rey could conceivably be a product of that relationship. Uh, and so it's obviously something that like really resonated with people, and I think that getting another strong female leader in the Star Wars galaxy is unsurprising. We've gotten a lot of them over the years, starting with
Mm-hmm.
Leia, and so getting another within the Clone Wars universe, I think is um, you know really wise, because we got Ahsoka, we got Ventress, and it's like, okay, well, where's the new political person, or the new
Kind of a
diplomatic
neutral,
person? Yeah.
well, which is funny. Yeah, diplomatic
And
neutral,
so getting her, I think, was
which
important to have.
yeah, which again, kind of dives into the complexity that is this show. That um, Satine is a great, vessel for the narrative of like government corruption
Yeah.
in this show.
Yep.
You know, like we have Palpatine, but that's a whole other level of corruption. Like that's a whole other thing. But just the like subtle levels of corruption down to like people slightly poisoning the drinks that are going into the public schools, like weird stuff like that, that are paying off, workers and stuff like that. Like she's a character for this other great storytelling, kind of like I think Padme is too in the show, a character we're already familiar with, but yeah, telling these more seemingly human stories that are outside the like framing of the Force and the Jedi and stuff. That's a little more understandable in our real world.
Yeah. Yeah. something that I want to make
Yeah.
sure we make note of, is
Yes,
that
please do.
something that we've talked about on the show for years and years and years, um, is that Jedi are jerks, and that they were making mistakes all along the way that provided an
Sure
opportunity for
did.
Palpatine to slip in between the cracks and make the cracks so much worse. Um,
He slid into those
yeah,
DMs hard.
he broke up the marriage by DMs. And looking at episode 15 of season 1, you see it really significantly even here. So this is the episode where it's called Trespass, and it's where the Talls, the like snow monster
Ah,
uh,
yes. Yeah, yeah.
natives, are being oppressed, and they're treated as not sentient beings to be considered politically, and they should be able to be controlled and used however um, uh, the like dominant species believes they ought to be used. And
That mostly has to do with the language
yes, it's
barrier,
mostly a
but
language problem. um, but to me, this kind of starts to like really within the context of Clone Wars show us like the limit to what the Jedi are supposed to be able to do. They are just there to talk, um, and their
hmm
role within the context of
they're
the newer,
keepers of
yeah,
the
like their
peace.
role within the context of the New Republic is to be this, you know, um, kind of unbiased observer. They're there as negotiators, and they're not to interfere. They're not to engage. And this is something that is consistent throughout um, the movies, and it's consistent within the Clone Wars as we go along. And this episode in particular really hits home the message to me that the Jedi have lost their way at this point. They have lost their ability to connect with their direct surroundings and um, to deal with the actual human or non-human, but still sentient suffering that's occurring right in front of them. And I think that this is one of those episodes that you can point back to and say like, yeah, like the Jedi are jerks. They lost their humanity in an attempt to be like this important powerful resource to the New Republic. And it's probably not out of a sense of something that's unethical. Like it's not because they want power, but it's because they've convinced themselves it's the right thing to do, it's the ethical, it's the good thing to do. um they have something that's a higher responsibility, and they can't impeach their uh unbiased reputation uh by getting involved in little border disputes or something like that. It's like, what's more
Yeah.
important than the suffering of an oppressed species? It's like there's nothing more important than that in the moment. Your responsibility to the New Republic government does not supersede the human suffering, or the Tal's suffering in this case, right in front of them. And so we see this struggle occurring for the Jedi on a mission by mission basis. I think really clearly illustrated here, and that's something that is a pretty important theme in my eyes in the prequel trilogy in particular. And so I'm
Yeah.
really glad
Yeah.
that we see that here as well.
I just had a thought for a spin-off podcast for us that could literally we could probably go over every episode of the Clone Wars, and you could probably dig up some sort of case, like actual be it civil trial, something or other, that is closely um, connected to like what we're
We
dealing
would
with in
call it
that
Law
episode.
Wars, and nobody would listen to it.
Yeah. Oh man. I find that greatly interesting. You're talking about that, and then I thought about like the Zillow Beast episodes of,
Yeah.
animal rights and stuff like that, and so interesting. I think this is probably going to be more than a 2-3 part series for us because there's just a lot to
Yeah, I feel like we
discuss,
barely scraped
and
the
that's
surface of like 1.5 seasons.
yeah, that's totally okay. That's totally fine. There's as we dig more and more up, it's great. I'm glad that we are, because these you know when you look at it, Clone Wars, in its entirety, is more content than the entire um, Skywalker saga.
Oh, a lot more, yeah.
In film. So the amount of depth that we're dealing with really is it's hard to just put it into a little couple hour discussion. But I'm glad that we started that discussion, sir.
Me too.
Whew. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Oh, I went and saw Rise of Skywalker again this past week,
You
so
dog.
woo, round 5. um, Thanks for joining us. I hope you know where to find us by now. This week we are celebrating the beginning of our 6th year of the
Gosh, that's so
show.
crazy.
Um, so yeah, the first episode was recorded 5 years ago this week, which is bonkers. So to be kind of kicking off our 6th season, as it were, is pretty wild. Yeah, you should know where to find us at Force Cult, pretty much everywhere. I am at AKA Star Wars Kid across the board. You can chat Law Wars with Jip at Darth Legalis
Come
on
on.
Twitter, possibly elsewhere if he's lurking anywhere else on the
Well,
web
now
these
that I've
days.
been living in the Pacific Northwest through
Oh, that
the
PNW.
first, like one half of a winter season, I've been
Mm-hmm.
really heavily active on, some weather forums, mostly discussing
Oh,
uh,
the best.
consistent, constant, never-ending rain, um, and how it just brings you so much joy day to day. So, if you want to discuss vitamin D supplementation with me on the weather.com forums, I'm there.
You need to get one of those fake indoor simulated
Yeah, happy
sunlights
lights.
and
Yeah,
put your
I've
name.
looked at them multiple times online. Somebody save me.
Oh man. Well, again, thank you all for joining us. Go turn on your happy lights by, you know, going to Disney Plus and ignite those episodes of Clone Wars. Rewatch it with us. May the Force be with you. Have a good week.